Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Southern Fire Exchange webinar. My name is David Godwin, and I'm the director of the Southern Fire Exchange program with the University of Florida. And I'm here today with Christian Fernandez from Tall Timbers Research Station and Sarah Kane from NC State University, both with our Southern Fire Exchange team. Today, we are excited to feature a presentation by Dr. Ludie Bond, Wildfire Mitigation Specialist and Public Information Officer with the Florida Forest Service. Dr. Bond will be sharing a presentation about her research related to prescribed fire communication methods and strategies here in Florida. So, as we said earlier, our presenter today is Dr. Ludie Bond. Dr. Bond has been a wildfire mitigation specialist and public information officer with the Florida Forest Service for over 20 years now. In her capacity as a public information officer, she provides local, state, and national and international media with information about wildfire incidents, wildfire causes, wildfire prevention, prescribed burning, and fuel mitigation programs in the area. She serves as a public information officer section lead on one of the Florida Forest Service complex incident management teams, and has responded as a public information officer to multiple wildfire incidents throughout Florida, the Southeast, and as far west as Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Utah, Montana, Oregon, Texas, and Utah. And if I missed any, sorry about that, Ludie. I'm sure there's more. Dr. Bond holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations, a Master of Forest Resources and Conservation, and a doctorate in Forest Resources and Conservation from the University of Florida. Go Gators. She was recently awarded the Stephen Spur Award by the Florida Division of the Society of American Foresters and the Outstanding Dissertation Award from the UF IFAS School of Forest Fisheries and Geomatic Sciences. Dr. Bond recently launched her own consulting company, Four Pines Consulting, to meet the growing demand for her expertise in prescribed fire communications. Welcome, Ludie. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you with us today. Looking forward to the presentation. And just 1 second as we trade out SlideShare.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to present today. I will be presenting the results of my research in my dissertation, which was entitled Evaluating Prescribed Fire Communications in the Southeastern U.S. Let's see. Ooh. There we go. So we'll start with by talking about the big burn of 1910. So this burn occurred in northern Idaho, eastern Washington, western Montana, southeastern British Columbia, burned over 3 million acres in just 2 days and resulted in 87 fatalities, primarily firefighters. It also destroyed national forests and several communities. So it resulted in the U.S. Forest Service rule that all fires must be suppressed by 10 a.m. the next day. So how did this affect fire communications? Well, fire is a very emotional topic. And as you can see from these campaign posters at the time, fire was described as an outlaw and as a demon. And I'll draw your attention here to the center poster from the Florida Forest Service that says, "The arm of public opinion stops forest fires." So it speaks to the power of public opinion with fire in our forests. And so another campaign at the time is the the United States' most successful ad campaign, Smokey Bear. And his slogan at the time was, "Only you can prevent forest fires." And you see him here with the babes in the woods. He's bandaging the cub's paw. You see the fuzzy cub bottom left and that fuzzy cub bottom right with the little girl. Another campaign at the time was the Dixie Crusaders. And this was a 3-year fire prevention campaign to educate Southerners about human-caused wildfires. And they did this through holding rallies, distributing literature, showing movies. It reached over 3 million people, but also an emotionally charged campaign. You see the children here in the top photograph. And their slogan was, "Stop woods fires. Growing children need growing trees." Well, that didn't stop Southerners from applying fire to the landscape. Southerners knew the benefit of fire. And so we have evidence of this from tree rings that show burn scars and know that fire was still continuing frequently in the South. So I'll offer you here a definition of prescribed fire from the National Forest Foundation. Prescribed fire is the controlled application of fire to restore the health of a forest or ecosystem. Well, the Southeast uses quite a bit of prescribed fire. And with this map, I'm showing you, and you see the key there at the bottom, that the darker colored states is where the majority of acreage with prescribed fire applied is occurring. Of course, here, like I said, I mentioned across the Southeast, you have Kansas and Florida, the darkest colors showing over 1 million acres burned. Well, actually in Florida, we average down here about 2.1 to 2.3 million acres a year of prescribed fire, both on public and private lands. And actually in 2024, we broke some records here in Florida with the number of acreage because we had optimal weather for that. Here in this map shows that the Southeast is the lightning capital of the United States. So this lightning density map does show, again, in the Southeast, that's where the majority of these lightning strikes are occurring. And according to the key, the majority of that is in the Gulf Coast states. And of course, the majority there in Florida, we are the lightning capital of our country. Now, the Southeast also experiences frequent fire. That's our normal fire regime, is very frequent fire. So according to this map, you're seeing, and with the key there in the bottom, that the dark red, dark orange, and orange areas is where fire occurs frequently naturally, right? We saw that lightning strike map. So the other parts of the country have either higher topography, snowpack, they don't have as many lightning strikes as we do here in the Southeast. So the most frequent fire regime should be occurring in these 13 Southeastern states. And the last map I'll show you shows that the Southeast has a lot of WUI. Well, wildland urban interface, a lot of you may be familiar with that term, is areas where communities exist in and near forested areas. And according to the key on this map, those yellow and red areas is where you have the highest concentration of WUI. Well, once again, a lot there in the Southeast and up the eastern coast. So an interesting point is that research shows that about 1,000 new people a day are moving into the state of Florida. And many of them historically have come from the Northeast and the Midwest. Well, we've seen trends where people are coming more and more from the West Coast of the United States, specifically California. So what's kind of interesting about that is that people are moving into our state and our area of the country where they may not have exposure to that much naturally occurring fire because they don't have the lightning, and they're not used to seeing prescribed fire as a land management tool. They don't have the exposure to fire that we have here in the Southeast and specifically in Florida. So what does that mean? That means it's very important, it's critically important to improve public perception of prescribed fire. And so now the campaigns are changing. Smokey Bear's message has changed from only you can prevent wildfires to only you can prevent forest fires, because we know the advantages of fire in our forested areas. So where Smokey Bear is the mascot for preventing human-caused fires, Burner Bob is the mascot there for prescribed fire. He is a bobwhite quail, and he is a fire-reliant species. There he is sporting his Nomex coat and his drip torch. And he's pictured here in this campaign poster with his friends who are also fire-reliant species, the gopher tortoise and the turkey and woodpecker. So another campaign for prescribed fire is whyprescribedfire.org. This is a partnership with Tall Timbers, Florida Forest Service, and Georgia Forestry Commission. And this campaign states that we use prescribed fire to protect our communities, to protect our firefighters, and to protect our forests. So now we are asking people, instead of vilifying fire, which we did a great job of in our nation historically, we are asking people to embrace fire. But research on public perception is lacking in the Southeast, where prescribed fires are the most prevalent. And so here I have listed in the bottom right several researchers who have done this type of social science research, but their research predominantly focused on Western states. And you can also see from the years here, it's been quite a while since research has been done. So why was I interested in doing this research? Well, as a public information officer for over 20 years with the Florida Forest Service, I communicate quite a bit about fire, both wildfire and prescribed fire, but prescribed fire is my passion. It's important to me to teach future generations about the importance and the need and the benefits of prescribed fire. And you could even say fire runs in my family. So that middle photo is one of my daughters, who is a forest ranger and wildland firefighter with the Florida Forest Service. So she is also passionate about fire. So today's presentation, we're going to go over the results of the 3 chapters that make up my dissertation. Social media use reveals public perceptions of prescribed burning. Prescribed fire communications should be adaptive to meet the needs of varying audiences. Identifying trusted messengers and the sources for delivering prescribed fire information. And then our conclusions and looking forward. Chapter 1 on social media has already been published in the Journal of Applied Communications. And I believe we have a link for that to share with you. So the first chapter, social media, we used a combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches for our social media analytics, and we used the uses and gratification theory to support our research. So I'll start with the story of 2 prescribed burns. Prescribed burn A was conducted by the Florida Forest Service. Prescribed burn B was conducted by St. Johns River Water Management District. Both burns contributed to smoke impacts to the cities of Tampa and Orlando, respectively. Now, on this particular day, January 21, 2020, optimum weather conditions existed in the state of Florida for everybody, multiple prescribed burns around the state of Florida on both public and private lands. And actually, in between A and B and Tampa and Orlando, there were several other prescribed burns that were occurring. But smoke doesn't have DNA. And so the radar indicated that A and B were indeed the points of origin for smoke that was impacting Tampa and Orlando. So when prescribed burns occur, they provide the opportunity for prescribed burn professionals such as myself to communicate with varying audiences about the where and the why these burns are being conducted. And social media is one of the platforms that we choose to use. Well, social media provides the opportunity for audiences to ask questions, express concerns, and share comments. That in turn provides an opportunity for prescribed burn professionals to respond to those comments, questions, and concerns. So by getting that feedback, it allows us the opportunity to know, is my message being understood as it was intended? Is there any misinformation, rumors, misconceptions? So social media really provides that opportunity for communication professionals to know if they are having successful and effective outreach. So here's a video loop of those fires. And as you can see, the smoke is going directly towards Tampa and Orlando. Over there underneath the letter A, where the burn started in Levy County, you'll see in Citrus County, another little smoke plume pops up. So it kind of shows you, yes, indeed, there were, and we checked our outdoor burn authorization records as well. There were indeed other burns occurring. Now, just for clarification, the upper right-hand corner, those are clouds. Nobody's conducting prescribed burns in the Atlantic Ocean that day, but those are clouds. All right, so what's the question for this chapter? What does social media use reveal about the current perceptions regarding the use of prescribed burning in Florida? Well, the methods that we used, we had 2 researchers that identified the counties that were impacted by the smoke. And then we identified the agencies who typically provide information on things going on in those counties and those communities. We divided those agencies into several groups. We had a government group, which was the land management agencies, the National Weather Service, and the fire rescue agencies. We had a law enforcement group, which was the sheriff's offices. And then we had a media group, which was radio, television, and newspaper. And then we identified the platforms that those agencies typically use for communication and outreach. So we looked at Facebook and Twitter, now known as X. We looked at Instagram and we looked at TikTok. And the predominant platforms that were used were Facebook and X. And over here, we had no preconceived ideas on the themes that would emerge as we started collecting our data. So we just let them emerge naturally. Our coding included the burns that they were referring to, the agencies, the date, the platform, as well as the comments exactly as they appeared on those social media posts. We also captured photographs, emojis, etc. Here's an example of a post that I put out, and you can see we had quite the reach. Almost 9,300 people reached and almost 2,000 engagement on this post. And these are photographs of the burn that day. Some other social media posts, for examples, we've got a television station in Tampa that is showing the smoke and the ash as it impacted downtown Tampa during rush hour. Then we had Citrus County Chronicle, and they're showing the smoke impacts to an area, Duke Energy on US Highway 19, just north of Crystal River. I know the photo is kind of small, but it's smoky. And then the Citrus County Sheriff's Office. So they shared a post that included the map and the press release that I put out for that day. And you can see there were several hundred shares on these posts and quite a few comments. Well, we had the high number of comments because of all the shares. But here's what we saw for the 3 posts that had the highest number of comments. We had Citrus County Chronicle, which was media. We had the Pasco County Fire Rescue Government, Citrus County Sheriff's Office Law Enforcement. What you don't see here is the Florida Forest Service and the St. Johns River Water Management District. So this tells me and told our researchers that people were going to the agencies and the platforms that they typically go to for information on things occurring in their communities. These are the trusted sources, the trusted agencies, the trusted platforms. So what this also says is not that you shouldn't put out information on your platforms for your agency and organization, but you should make sure that you are collaborating with those agencies and platforms who do have the highest reach in your communities that you're trying to reach, and make sure that you have that kind of relationship where they will then share your information. We also looked at frequently used words on social media. So you can see the negative words, they were all focused on smoke, right? Smoke, burns, smelling, allergies, awful, horrible. And then you had the positive words here as well. Effective, amazing, safe, helping, benefits, strong. So we had quite the gamut of words there, either end of the spectrum, but the majority of the negative words did have, were having to do with smoke impacts. What really stood out to us, though, were the champions. Okay, so champions are individuals who are providing passionate support with positive comments on social media. And so here are some examples. One comment was, why are they burning? Wildlife is already struggling for a place to live. And then a champion says, we need to understand the benefits of prescribed burns for wildlife. And another champion says, well, a controlled burn rids the forest to build up materials that create the uncontrolled fires. But then another question was, why are we having intentional fires? The trees provide oxygen for us to live. And then a champion comments, well, California and Australia are why. You don't want super fires. And then another champion says, well, we're not burning the trees, just the buildup of undergrowth and dead material. And then another champion, it's also good for wildlife. The fire will burn off the dead leaves and brush, and new growth will begin immediately. So what this revealed to us was that champions can be a very important part for fire communications. They are an emerging trend. They can assist with building capacity for prescribed fire messengers. These peer-to-peer conversations can really increase the strength of your communication outreach. And they can also dissuade misinformation, rumors. It encourages trust in your agency. And so we do recommend that future research should examine some of these emerging platforms like the Nextdoor app or Facebook groups like Word of Mouth. Uses and gratification. They are a complex set of desires that audiences search to satisfy through mass media. Uses and gratification theory states why people satisfy specific needs through social media choices. So our research showed how audience use social media to meet prescribed fire information needs. The next chapter is on communication plans. We used a qualitative approach in 26 interviews, and we focused on successes, failures, and barriers in communication plans. And we're going to introduce to you the Bond adaptive communication model. So our question here is, what methods are natural resource communication professionals using for prescribed fire communication, and what are their needs in implementing the outreach? And how can they become trusted messengers? So prior research states that, communication professionals can play a critical role in prescribed fire communications by providing ongoing education information and timely information as the burns are conducted. I mentioned we used a qualitative approach for our interviews, and we feel that our results will achieve consistent messaging and improve the status of trusted messengers. So our participant selection, we received a list of prescribed fire professionals for state forestry agencies from the Southern Group of State Foresters, and they are a nonprofit organization representing state forestry agencies in the Southeast. And so we interviewed state forestry, other natural resource agencies, as well as regional organizations. And then during our interviews, we used the snowball method, where we asked our interviewees to maybe recommend someone else who may be willing to do an interview with us. And so we ended up also interviewing State Parks and Recreation, State Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resource, extension agents with land grant universities, and then Tall Timbers and the Southern Group of State Foresters. The semi-structured approach of our interviews, we had a preset group of questions we asked that were open-ended. And so interviewees had the opportunity to contribute additional information that they thought may add value to our data. And similar to chapter 1, our researchers had no preconceived ideas on themes. We just let them emerge. Once we compiled our data, we saw that we did indeed see consistent themes that emerged. And so that exemplified the rigor in our data and the dependability and confirmability of our findings. The first thing, primary communication barrier, is capacity. So interviewees mentioned that they need to implement constant communications, they need to build local capacity and succession, and that they need to improve collaborations with cooperators and other natural resource agencies. So one comment was, we get pulled in so many directions that it's hard to really do a good job with any one thing, because we're doing an okay job, with like 100 things. I know we can all relate to that. Collaboration, consistency, timeliness, and transparency. So these are elements that are very critical for successful communications. Second theme, communication methods use many platforms. So they felt that you must diversify your messaging platforms, like using social media, local media, PSAs, press releases, newsletters. And then there's the in-person communication outreach as well, with presentations, field days, workshops, but that we must seek out constant education. The people are not connected to technology. Social media won't reach a lot of demographics, and we know this. Social media is not going to reach everybody, hence the multiple platforms. And then another comment was, our job is ever evolving with lots of different avenues, platforms, technology, and messaging techniques. So the point here is that the world of communication is changing at such a rapid pace that you really have to spend a lot of time staying focused on sharpening your skills on how to use all the different platforms. So that means you have to have capacity, which was a barrier in the first theme that came out. Capacity, you will see, runs through a lot of the results that we had. Audiences vary, another theme. Cultural, geographical, generational barriers. So the interviewee stated that they listen to what the audiences are saying, then they communicate with them on that level, and they don't use the same message for everyone. So one interviewee stated, if I see barriers or walls coming up, I'll find a different way to communicate. And then another one stated, that's been a very interesting element towards communication, making sure we're figuring out what the general conversation is from our audiences before tailoring our messages. So again, with the feedback, It's very important to get to know your audiences, get that feedback from them so that you know what's important to them, what their information needs are, and this is going to ensure the success and effectiveness of your communication outreach. So feedback is extremely important. This one I agree with and found very interesting. Excuse me. Communication successes and failures depend on timing, accuracy, and transparency. So they stated that misinformation could actually result from bad timing or releasing inaccurate information. They stated that maintaining timely and accurate information to our audiences is important. And in tough communication topics, it's best to get in front of it and get your message out to stave off rumors and information. So, excuse me again, what this says is that if you get the timing, the accuracy, and the transparency correct, it's a success. If you get it wrong, it's a failure. Makes sense. Okay, last two themes. Trusted messengers can vary. If you build the brand with personnel that are trusted messengers, then Facebook and Twitter, now known as X, will become trusted sources of information. So what this is saying is if you use a trusted messenger or messengers, your message, your platform, and your agency will be trusted because you took the time to find out who those trusted messengers are. This next one I found very interesting, mostly positive perception. So when we asked communication professionals if they think there's positive public perception for communication in their areas, they were like, well, you know, I think so. Everybody's doing it. Maybe it's a social norm. Maybe it's a cultural thing. We're not really sure. Or maybe it could be that they considered compliments or complaints on social media as the best indicators, as well as one-on-one feedback occurring on phone calls and emails. So they were saying that if they get more compliments and less complaints, then they guess it's a positive perception. So they were saying, you know, really, we just don't know. We don't have any way of finding out. We don't have the capacity to do surveys. We really don't have the data to really make a sure judgment on if it's positive or not. So we're going to introduce to you the Bond Adaptive Communication Model. So this model combines aspects of Osgood's communication model and adaptive management. So Osgood's communication model describes how the communicator and the receiver have dual and reciprocal roles. They are within themselves their own circular communication system. And then adaptive management is a way of managing natural resource areas where the objectives and strategies are determined, they are decided upon, and then the actions from those are implemented. And then based on the observations and data, you can determine if your management is effective or not, and if you need to make adaptations or not. So let's apply those two concepts to this model. We're going to start with adaptive management in the development and planning stages. So when communication professionals are developing their communication plans, they're identifying audiences, they're identifying the needs and the platforms that they're going to need. They're also going to, in the planning stages, what are the desired outcomes, and develop those communication goals and strategies and actions. Okay, so now once all those are determined, you move into the actual communication stage. So this is Osgood's communication model. So you see here, the original communicator is the source of information. They are going to communicate information to the original receiver, which is the destination. They're going to use the predetermined and pre-decided upon messaging and platforms that was decided back in the development and planning stages. So they communicate the information to the receiver, who interprets that information. Now the original receiver needs to provide feedback back to the original communicator. So they in turn become the second round of communicators, and now your original communicator becomes the receiver. As the feedback is being provided from the original receiver back to the original communicator, there is what we call noise, which provides distraction for now the receiver to interpret, is the feedback positive or neutral, or is it negative? If it's positive or neutral, then the messaging and platforms must be working. So they will continue to use those messaging and platforms. If it's negative, that lets you know that, oh, it must not be received as it was intended. We must make some adaptations to the messaging and platforms. What if there is no feedback? If the original receiver does not provide any feedback back to the original communicator, they don't know. Was my message received as it was intended? Is it effective? Is it successful? They really don't know. So this really shows you how important and how critical feedback from your audience is. So we really feel like communication professionals could use this type of model to make sure they are getting the feedback they need from their audiences to determine and ensure that their communication outreach is successful. So our recommendations for this chapter is that communication professionals should use a collaborative approach, including consistent, timely, and transparent prescribed fire communications. They should use the Bond adaptive communication model, where feedback is the critical ingredient for successful communication, and then further exploration of science-related communication, because it's ever changing and ever evolving. So they should, for further research, should look at those social networks, the social influencers, and the champions. Okay, the third chapter, trusted messengers. We used a combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches through surveys and interviews, and we supported our research with social identity theory and source credibility theory. So the questions for this chapter is, who are the trusted messengers? What are the preferred methods of receiving those messages? And then which sources are considered the most trusted and up to date? Prior research from McCaffrey and Olson states that a positive, trusting relationship between natural resource agencies and their audiences is essential for public acceptance of land management practices such as fuels management. And so that would be prescribed fire. McCaffrey also stated in her research in 2006 that even if your audiences don't understand your land management practice, if they trust the people or persons implementing those land management practices, they're much more willing to be acceptive and supportive of that land management practice. And McCaffrey and Olson further stated in their research that government agencies are typically perceived as the most trustworthy among these sources, particularly when communicators have established a rapport through consistent interactive outreach efforts. So we're going to look at two case studies where we examined fire science audiences and communicators. And our objective was to assist communication professionals in becoming trusted messengers and sources that prescribe fire information. So our first case study is to determine the current and preferred sources and preferred delivery methods for prescribed fire information. So the first survey, we had a really great turnout on that, a little over 4,500. This was distributed to non-industrial private forest landowners in the Southeast, and we used Qualtrics because it was during COVID and we had no other options. And then survey 2 was distributed to prescriber and professionals at a prescriber and council meeting here in Florida. It was distributed in person and online using Qualtrics and a QR code. And also it was distributed to the public at educational meetings here in Gilchrist and Alachua County and Marion counties here in Florida. Distributed in person. This survey was expanded to include sources considered trusted and/or up to date. All right, so the survey participants had multiple choices on this survey, but for the purposes of our presentation, we're going to show you the top 3 most chosen. And you can see in the key in the bottom there, the color key, you can see the current and the preferred. So the non-industrial private forest landowners and prescriber and professionals chose U.S. Forest Service as their current and preferred. All 3 groups chose State Forestry Service and State Department of Agriculture. The non-industrial private forest landowners and the public chose county forestry agencies. The public chose social media. And then the prescriber and professionals chose Southern Fire Exchange, which we know is a regional fire science communication program. Preferred methods of delivery. So all three groups chose email and social media. The non-industrial private forest landowners chose newsletters by email or mail. The public also chose that as an option, top three option. And then the prescriber professionals chose in-person workshops. And then for the most trusted and up-to-date sources. Now remember, this question was not included for the private landowners. So the prescriber and professionals in the public both chose state forestry and State Department of Agriculture. They also chose U.S. Forest Service. The public chose county forestry agencies. And then the prescriber and professionals once again chose Southern Fire Exchange. The second case study, we did 23 Zoom interviews with extension professionals, and the questions helped to identify the barriers to develop trust with audiences while disseminating prescribed fire programming. They stated that they felt it was their inexperience and their lack of personal fire-related knowledge and hands-on experience. They knew they needed more training, but a shortage of time is a barrier. There's that capacity theme coming back. They knew these barriers hinder their success in becoming trusted sources of messengers, becoming trusted sources of information, but that these barriers certainly must be overcome. The social credibility theory states that a message is more persuasive when the source of the message is perceived as being credible. And then social identity theory states that individuals are more likely to trust information from sources they perceive as similar or belonging to their social group. So Aneto et al. States here that people are likely to be persuaded if the information source has similar characteristics and is considered credible, a subject matter expert, and trustworthy. So it shows how these two theories work very well in concert with each other. So we feel like the three chapters in our research really work well together, complement each other to fill that knowledge gap that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, where we have not had that much research on prescribed fire communications here in the Southeast. Here's our three takeaways. We feel like expanding collaborations, identifying trusted messengers and sources of prescribed fire information, as well as engaging those community champions, will all result in increasing acres burned because of an increase in positive public perception for prescribed burning. I'd like to thank my collaborators during my research. They not only allowed me to be a part of their research, but they helped me. They were invaluable in collecting data and analyzing the data. So April Z, Hope Miller, Kelly Grogan, Jana Hilson-Roth, and Misty Sharp. Of course, the interview and survey participants, because without them, we would have no data to share with you or to analyze or to share with you. Oh, and then my advisory committee. They were just incredible with their advice, their encouragement. They helped me advance my critical thinking skills, my research methods, and my technical writing. So Raylene Crandall, Maisha Clark, John Diaz, Lisa Lundy, and Chelsea Crandall. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ludie. That was awesome. And I'm excited that we have time for everybody to ask questions and engage in some conversation with you. Once again, if you joined us during the presentation, my name is David Godwin, and I'm the director of the Southern Fire Exchange with the University of Florida. And our speaker today is Dr. Ludie Bond with the Florida Forest Service. And at this point in our program, we'd like to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I'm excited to get to questions. It's usually my favorite part of the whole thing. And we hope that you'll use the Q&A tool in Zoom. You'll see that feature on your screen, and go ahead and type your questions in there. If you see questions that other folks have already asked that you would like us to get to, please give it a thumbs up, or you can comment on that as well, and we'll try to get through those questions in the time that we have available. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Of course, I always have my own questions too, Ludie, and so I'm going to try and get those in as well. Got to start to say I was pretty excited to see SFE our program was listed as a trusted messenger, and
yes,
yeah, hashtag not sponsored, but that was wonderful. And we're excited to see that. And we hope that we can continue to do work to keep that as something that as a result. I see Sean has a question. I want to make sure we get to that. Sean
Mhm.
says, with the weather in peninsular Florida this spring, are you seeing additional challenges with prescribed fire messaging? Good
I
question.
would,
Yeah, it's been dry for a lot of
yeah, I would
places.
say not challenges, but opportunities. There's opportunities for provide more and more information because of the increase in wildfire activity that we're seeing across the state. You know, I did an interview earlier this week where they wanted me to talk about wildfires, and of course my messaging always leads back to prescribed fire. And so even though we have some of the highest numbers of wildfire occurrence in the southeast and here in Florida because of being naturally occurring with lightning, we don't have the large fires that our Western partners typically have. And a lot of that we would like to say is because of our use of prescribed burning and our robust prescribed burn program. When uh, the, the fires happened in Southern California this year, we had with the Palisades fires and others, myself and my peers were receiving phone calls saying, oh, can California happen in Florida? And the answer is yes, and it did. The firestorm of 1998, 10,000 firefighters coming to Florida, 500,000 acres on fire. But since then, we have created the most robust prescribed burn program in the nation. And then it just kind of leads you right into talking about the necessity for prescribed fires, the support we get from our elected officials, and what does that mean for our public and our audience, that we need their understanding and their patience during prescribed burns when they are occurring, because we would much rather have smoke impacts, which is always the biggest concern. We would rather have smoke impacts under a prescription and a controlled environment than what we see from wildfires. So that is kind of, you can always take a wildfire message and roll it right into prescribed burning. The concern with some of the wildfires that we are seeing in some parts of our country right now is they are escape prescribed burns. So that's always a challenging one. And you've got to be upfront and aggressive with that messaging and transparent. It's like having an incident within an incident, a crisis communication plan. You have to have a crisis communication plan for when you do have escapes so that you have predetermined and pre-decided upon messaging right in your back pocket. And you don't have to guess at what you're going to say because it's already been decided upon. Because when there's an escape, things can get a little frazzled. So make sure you have your crisis communication plan outlined, and then you're going to nuance it to that specific incident. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about prescribed fire when we're seeing a lot of wildfire.
Question in the Q&A from Carolyn. Carolyn says, I'm thinking the Tall Timbers Fire Festival, including the demos and booths with various organizations every 2 years, is a good outreach tool, especially last year, Carolyn says, that they had the local weatherman as one of the speakers. Could you comment on the Tall Timbers event?
Absolutely.
Connecting with meteorologists and then even maybe talk about fire festivals as a whole.
Yeah, so we're seeing definitely an increase in fire festivals around the Southeast, and even in California, they're starting to have fire festivals now. And there is some research being done on the impacts of fire festivals. What are the impacts on attitudes from people who actually come and attend those events? So the Red Hills Fire Fest is held every other, the even years and the odd years. We have it here at Flatwoods, the Flatwoods Fire and Nature Fest here in Gainesville, at Austin Carey with the University of Florida. And those are great opportunities to get, as you know, get people up close to fire and get them used to it and around it, and to explain it. Involving a meteorologist is great because meteorologists are trusted messengers. Okay, so my mom watches the Weather Channel 24/7. I mean, who does not trust a meteorologist? So when you are able to really integrate them with your messaging, that is so important. I know the interview I did on Tuesday here in Gainesville, they sat me down with a meteorologist to talk about fire weather and what are all the weather components, the factors that have led us to the wildfire season we're having right now in Florida. The other thing I did recently, and you all can do this throughout the whole United States, pair up with your local National Weather Service office. Who gives you your weather? That's who you need to make a relationship with. So myself and a couple peers did a field trip. We went up to Jacksonville. We sat with National Weather Service. They have extensive media training And I know here in Florida, they pair up very closely with our county emergency operations centers for tropical weather because we got lots of hurricanes as well as wildfires. So they were very excited about working with us on messaging. My thought with going to see them is if I have a press conference or a press release or something that I want to bring them in as a subject matter expert, I want to have that relationship with them because they are trusted messengers. Their messaging is going to support my agency's messaging on what happened because weather is the primary indicator of how fire will or won't behave. So I definitely recommend doing that with the National Weather Service, wherever you get your weather from.
Here's a question from Lou in the Q&A. Lou says, what recommendations for communicating prescribed fire opportunities do you have for non-governmental agencies? Lou gives examples such as Quail Forever, chapters where they're actively involved with burn teams with local landowners.
Sure. So whatever, some of those groups and organizations do have some platforms on getting information out, but you can't put everything out on social media because you'll miss a lot of audiences. So that kind of reiterates the idea of using multiple platforms. So the first thing you always do in any communication plan is, who's my audience? Who do I want to reach out to? What is important to them? What do they want to know about? If you preach to the choir, people who already know that you burn for quail habitat, then that's not really who you need to reach. You need to go outside of that. So one of the things that I would definitely recommend is try to partner up with other groups or organizations in your counties or your city areas that do have a very extensive outreach program. Maybe, I mean, Sheriff's Office and Emergency Management is not really, I think, who Quail Forever would want to partner with, but who is it in your area that does have a great reputation, that does have a great outreach that you could coordinate messaging with? And I'll give you an example. Recently, I wanted to get a lot of information out for people to sign up for their county alert programs so they can be alerted if there is an evacuation for a wildfire. So I called my county EOC and my county fire rescue and said, we need a coordinated message. It's a message from the Florida Forest Service, but you have the biggest reach. You put out the message. I'll help you write it. So we have the verbiage down, but it's showing a coordinated, consistent messaging with partners who are involved in wildfires. So from a prescribed fire standpoint, and we can even talk offline if you want to contact me and we can kind of run through and look at some stuff, but finding out who you need to partner with to get information out for the reach that you're wanting. But the first thing is to identify your audiences and then go from there.
Here's a good question from Paxton. Paxton says, do you have any suggestions for how to overcome language and cultural barriers in communication related to prescribed fire? Or do you have suggestions for how to find or connect with local community leaders to help you in bridging those gaps?
That's an excellent question. And so that kind of speaks to what I was saying with, identifying and knowing your audiences, knowing what their comfort language is, knowing what their who are their trusted messengers, how do they get their information, and then you need to fold in right there with that. So if it's a language, I hate to use the word barrier for that, it's just what their culture is, what are their cultural norms, what are their comfort languages. Find out who you can utilize and use as a spokesperson that they trust. Maybe it's a pastor at their church. Maybe it's some other community leader in their community. It's going to take some time and effort to really find out how to communicate with those audiences, but the return on that investment is going to be great because you just do that on the front end and be proactive with that and be able to utilize that. We have a lot of those opportunities here in Florida because we're such a melting pot of not just languages but cultures. And so even if it's a message coming from, say, my agency, a government agency, maybe we are not the trusted messenger. We're in uniform and we're with the government, and that could be very off-putting to your audience. And so your messaging won't be very successful if that's who it's coming from. But then find out who in the community. Sometimes you can go through law enforcement agencies and find out, how do you all communicate with this community? And I'd love to see if you have any ideas for us, because they've had to spend some time to figure out how are they going to work with this community and who are their spokespeople. So that's at least somewhere to start. And we
Mhm.
can talk again offline. I'll be glad to talk more with you about this.
We had another question from Shinara, and Shinara says, enjoyed the dissertation. Do you think it is possible to apply the bond model to agricultural prescribed burns, such as in sugarcane pre-harvesting or even other agricultural applications? A little bit different, and sometimes it can be trickier messages or more controversial in some places.
It certainly can be, and that can be a very emotionally charged conversation, especially around sugarcane and some of the topics that have come up regarding the use of that. In Florida, our top two industries are tourism and agriculture, and sometimes they conflict with each other. When we're putting smoke on Disney, it's not like a good deal. So yeah, again, the question was how do you message with that group or for that particular topic? I think you can still apply that model. Again, doing your strategies, your plan, developing your communication plan. What is your strategies? What are your methods you're going to use? But you've got to, it's back to the same thing. Who is your audience? How do they get their information? Who do they trust? What are the platforms that are going to work? And then you implement your messaging with those platforms, and then based on the feedback you get, because you always, with anything that you do, you want to have some way to measure, is it successful or not? And then when you get that feedback, then you can start making those adaptations. So I think the bond adaptive communication model can be used in all natural, not just natural resource areas, but plenty of others as well.
Yeah, it sounds like your model is almost blind to the messages. It's a process. An adaptive management process such
Mm-hmm.
that you could use it for any kind of message. You're just using it to refine how you're communicating, how you're assessing how those messages were received, and then refining the messages over time. Is that
And it
right?
can be very interesting. What you think is definitely going to be a great message because it's the message you've always used, and you think this is our message and we just need to get it out. And then based on that feedback, you might really be surprised that, oh, I didn't think they would understand it that way. I know when we were doing some burnouts on a wildfire down in Homestead about a month or so ago, I had people asking me, why are you doing prescribed burning on a wildfire? And we were not. It was a burnout. It's completely different type of operational tactic. But it was very interesting that people just thought, no, if you're intentionally setting fire, it's got to be a prescribed burn, even if it's in a wildfire incident. And so that was interesting to me.
Here's a question from Chelsea. And Chelsea says, are there any insights from your work on communicating with the public that could be leveraged to enhance communication between prescribed fire crews and other agencies or organizations with whom they need to coordinate before and after a burn? Interesting question.
Okay, you need to repeat that. There's
Yeah.
a lot to that.
All right. So are there insights on from your work on communicating with the public? So what you've learned so
Mhm.
far that could be used to enhance communication between prescribed burning crews
Mhm.
and other agencies that they need to work with.
Yeah, so okay, I get it now. So that's something that I talk about. I have a presentation on engaging various audiences in prescribed fire, and we have internal and external audiences. We always know who the external audiences are. They're elected officials, they're media, they're people in the community. Your internal audience would be your crews, your fire crews, your cooperators. So you need to have agreed upon messaging that's going to be used by everybody. So that can be very specific to a specific burn, or it can be very overarching benefits of of the benefits of prescribed fire. So I'll describe what that means. With your prescribed fire crews, with your burning crews, they need to know the what, when, and why, and how you're doing that burn that day. Because let's say they encounter some members of the public when they're icing down their coolers or gassing up their trucks or whatever, or going back for more mop up and that kind of thing, and looking for hot spots, and they're still out there for several days. So they need to have those message points so that when they do encounter the public, they know what to say instead of, I don't know, I just showed up at work and they told me to come out here today. Then with your cooperating agencies, it's very crucial. It's very important that all of your audiences hear consistent messaging, consistent terminology on prescribed fire from everybody who's putting fire on the ground and smoke in the air. And that's how you build trust in the practice of prescribed fire. That's how you build trust with all the agencies who are doing this work. So no matter who's got the green pants on, no matter who's holding the drip torch, the public, the media, they're getting the same message and the same information. That goes so far in being a critical component of becoming trusted messengers. So one of the things you need to do if you have somebody who does outreach, public information, public affairs, they need to be tying in with their partners who are also doing outreach and communication and sharing the verbiage, sharing the terminology. You know, in WCG, on the PIO bulletin board every year, we have our messaging for the fire season. This is what we're saying this year. And it's pretty much the same. It's very consistent. There are some nuances, but we should have the same thing for prescribed fire with our own agencies and organizations. Here are the messaging for this year. Here's what's important to us for this year, and make sure you're sharing that.
So following up, this is my own question. Do you think that most prescribed fire practitioners, regardless of the uniform or patch or PPE or private landowners, do you think they're responsible for working on communication efforts as complex as what you're talking about today? Should this fall on their shoulders?
Well, maybe not as complex, but you certainly need to know the general message points, because for consistency's sake. And so you certainly can turn to people who do a lot of prescribed fire communication and outreach in your area. There should be the consistency with the messaging. So I know I have a lot of people turn to me and say, we're wanting to do more communication, more outreach. Can you give us your presentation? Can you give us some pointers? Can we meet and talk about it so we know what we're doing and how to do our outreach? You're really doing a disservice to your own organization, your own agency, and definitely a disservice to your internal audiences if you're not providing that information to them. I'm not saying that they need to do a webinar or get in front of a TV camera, but they certainly need to know the benefits of, or the objectives. The objectives. Why are you burning? Why is it important? Why do you use prescribed fire? And it needs to be more than just reducing wildfire risk, because not everybody's scared of fire. If you haven't lived in an area where there hadn't been fire in a while, you'd be like, or maybe you live in a condo in downtown Tampa on Bayshore Boulevard, and you're not scared of a fire burning down your condo on the 13th floor, but you don't like the smoke. You're concerned about the animals that you perceived were all burning up. You still want healthy natural areas. So that kind of goes back to finding out what is important to your audiences. Fire is an emotional topic. Natural resources is an emotional topic. And with a lot of people, that's their concern about prescribed fire. It's how is it impacting them and how is it impacting natural resources. I would say go to whyprescribedfire.org. There is a frequently asked question page there. There's videos, there's graphics, there's all this great stuff that you can either use or model after. But for every one of those concerns that I just mentioned and more, there are responses there that you can use. I use that on social media all the time. Somebody will ask me a question. I just go to frequently asked questions on prescribedfire.org. I copy and paste and make sure it fits with the question and put it right in there. That's consistency in messaging, and that's so important.
So it reminds me of Lane Green had this one message, many voices program, such that, and it gets back to one of the things you had said earlier about even if your role is to drag a torch, when you get asked at the gas station or by somebody in the community, even if you are not a communication professional, you still need to have a foundation and this consistent message of what you're doing and why, right? And then for communication professionals like yourself, then your role is to develop strategies that are based on science and that are much more effective at reaching a wider variety of people more effectively. than the folks in the field could necessarily have time or capacity to do. Is that right?
Yeah, for those of you who have been on wildfire assignments and even a briefing before you go out on your prescribed burn, and your safety officer says, everybody who's a safety officer raise their hand. You better all be raising your hand because everybody's a safety officer on a fire, wildfire or prescribed fire. So I ask my crews, who's a public information officer? And they'll be like, I was like, no, you better all raise your hand. Because if you got on green pants and a patch or you're got Nomex on, you are a public information officer and you might not get asked the question today, but maybe you're at the grocery store, maybe you're picking up your kids from school. Wherever you're at, people who know you know what you do, and they're going to have questions about that, especially if there's a lot of smoke in the air. They're going to want to know, oh, is that a wildfire? Oh, is it prescribed fire? Why are you burning right now? It's so dry, or whatever the questions are. So it's very important that we provide the, like I said, you're doing a disservice if you don't provide that information to your organization and your agency. And that applies to the non-government agencies, definitely.
Well, Ludie,
Well, you're
thank you
welcome.
for your time in presenting today. And thank you for taking the time to go over these questions. And I appreciate everybody who submitted questions into the Q&A and into the chat. It's been fun. We have gone over a little bit, so I'm glad you guys stuck here. Dr. Bond, do you have any final comments or remarks that you'd like to leave with today?
Yes, I do. In a recent statement by the former director of the U.S. Forest Service, gosh, his name just went right out of my face, right out of my head.
Chief Moore.
Chief Randy Moore. Thank you very
Yep.
much. The former chief of the U.S. Forest Service, Randy Moore, in one of his recent statements, he said that it is imperative to effectively address the wildfire crisis in our nation, that we have a drastic increase in the application of prescribed fire on both private and public land throughout our nation. In order to do this, we have to have support from our communities, from our media, from our elected officials. And the way we get support is communicating about the need and the importance and the benefit of prescribed fire. And that messaging and ability to do that is more critical now than ever, not just here in the United States, but throughout our world. So this is very important. And I appreciate you all attending today. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. If you'd like to follow up with Dr. Bond, we've got her email address on the screen. You can reach out and connect with her after the program today.